Who's actually going to get the most out of this Selmer TS44 professional tenor sax? Who should walk away? And does the price make sense for the average player who just wants a solid instrument for gigs and practice? That's the question I hear a lot when I'm scrolling through forums and trying to figure out if the hype matches the reality. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon, and I'll walk you through the bits that matter after you've already done the quick Google search. First off, the biggest hesitation most buyers have isn't about the lacquer finish or the brand name. Those are pretty straightforward. The real worry is ending up with an instrument that sounds great on paper but feels off in the rehearsal room, or worse, one that needs a professional tech to get it into playing condition before you can even try a simple scale. Tenor saxophones sit in a sweet spot where the price jumps dramatically between student models and the professional tier, and it's easy to overpay for a piece of gear that doesn't match your level of commitment. On the flip side, buying a cheap beginner sax and then outgrowing it quickly can cost more in the long run because you end up with two instruments instead of one. That's why I spent a few weeks watching YouTube demos, reading the few reviews that actually mention the TS44, and even listening to a couple of live recordings where the instrument was listed in the credits. The consensus is clear. This sax is aimed at players who are already comfortable with the basics and are looking for a reliable workhorse that won't surprise them mid-solo. Let's talk about the tenor sax category for a second. Unlike clarinets or flutes, a sax's professional label often means a combination of handcrafted keywork, a more responsive bore, and a finish that can handle the wear of touring. The Selmer TS44 sits in the middle of Selmer's lineup, positioned just above the Student Series, but below the ultra-high-end Mark VI or Series 2 models. In practical terms, that means you get a lacquered body that's resistant to the inevitable dings you get in gig bags, and a key action that's smoother than what you'd find on a starter instrument. It's not a custom hand-finished piece, but the factory tolerances are tight enough that most players won't notice any adjustment needed after a basic professional setup. Who should buy it? If you're a high school senior who's already gigging in a jazz combo, a college student who spends weekends playing at local venues, or a semi-professional musician who needs a dependable sax for studio sessions, the TS44 checks a lot of boxes. Its tone sits in that warm mid-range sweet spot that blends nicely in a sax section, but also holds its own when you step out for a solo. I've heard it described as full-bodied without being boomy, which is exactly the kind of sound you want when you're trying to sit nicely behind a rhythm section. Because the instrument comes lacquered, you don't have to worry about the nitrocellulose finishes that can chip after a few months of heavy use. That durability factor is a hidden value that many beginners overlook, but seasoned players appreciate. On the other hand, you should probably skip the TS44 if you're just picking up the sax for the first time or if you're on a shoestring budget. Beginner saxophones usually come with a softer key feel and a more forgiving intonation curve, which can help you develop good habits without the frustration of constantly adjusting your embouchure. The TS44, while not as finicky as a vintage pro, still expects you to have a decent baseline technique. You'll notice that the octave key response is more immediate, and that can feel a little abrupt if you haven't built up the muscle memory yet. Also, if you travel a lot and need a lightweight instrument that fits into a cramped gig bag, you might find the TS44 a bit on the heavier side compared to some newer composite body models that market themselves as travel-friendly. The weight isn't a deal breaker for most players, but it's something to keep in mind if you're constantly hopping on a plane. Now, let's get into the practical strengths that show up when you actually take the sax to a rehearsal. The key layout feels intuitive. The left-hand palm keys sit comfortably, and the right-hand ring keys have a nice, crisp click that lets you know they're fully seated. In my own test, I was able to run through a fast bebop line without any sticky spots, which is a subtle but important quality when you're trying to keep the momentum going. The lacquer finish also does a solid job of resisting fingerprints and smudges, so after a long night at a club the sax still looks presentable for the next gig. Another plus is the ergonomics of the bell. It projects forward enough to give you good projection on stage, but it's not so aggressive that you're constantly fighting the sound to stay balanced in a small practice.